Hi, this is Dave from the Flowood High School Industrial Arts Shop Program. I'm here in the shop and we're going to go over shop safety for the power miter box. This tool, you could just call it many different things. It's a miter box, it's a chop saw. People have numerous different names for it. This is the 12-inch DeWalt compound sliding. This pulls out. It also cuts bevels both directions. So it's a sliding compound 12-inch miter saw that DeWalt makes. And it also pivots both directions. So we're going to talk about safety today. When you're using this tool, the first thing you want to make sure, check it, make sure that the cord is good, make sure that the cord is out of the way, that you're not going to cut the cord when you're making a cut. We're in the shop here, so it's always in a fixed position. Our chop saw is fastened down, so no matter where you're using your chop saw, whether it's in a shop or it's out in the field somewhere, make sure that your miter box chop saw, make sure it's fastened in place so it can't tip over, fall, move around at all. That's one of the first things you want to make sure. Make sure your cord is good. Make sure it's out of the way. When you're using a miter box, as you can see, there are numerous teeth in the blade that I have on there. I think it's an 80 tooth blade that's on there. And that blade, I'll just turn it on. That's pretty dangerous. So there's a guard on here. One thing you gotta always be careful is make sure that this guard, this shield that protects the blade, that keeps your hands and anything else, make sure that this guard is not cracked, broke, missing in any way. Make sure that it's always there. After you've checked over the machine, make sure everything is okay, and you go to start making your cuts, you want to make sure that you have an area, like I said, we have a bench that we've built here to create to hold the miter saw in place. You can buy Biesmeyer fences, you can buy, DeWalt makes a portable miter saw stand that'll help support your material. And we made one. We use it's great because we have a tape measure that we glued, we embedded into the MDF material, and we have a stop. So when we're making multiple cuts, we can set the stop up. We have a tape measure that's on here. It's fairly accurate. You need to check that periodically because it doesn't move. And it's great to use. And we have a lot of length here, so we can hold and cut long boards without having to worry about needing an extra hand to be able to do it. So no matter where you're using the chop saw, make sure that your material is supported. And if you need an extra hand to hold the board, or you need to create something to help support the board, so that the board, when you cut it off, it doesn't flop and hit the saw and bounce back and hit you. When using the chop saw, you always start on a sliding chop saw. You start out at the front edge of the board. And when you start out here, you hold it down, you cut on this edge, you push the saw blade all the way down, push the saw blade all the way down, hold it down, and then you push it back. And make sure you're holding it down and pushing it all the way back before you stop. Once you get to this position, you need to let go of the trigger. Once you've let go of the trigger, don't raise the saw up until the blade is completely stopped. Because you can have a little chunk that's cut off here can get caught into the teeth and come flying out. But before you make any cut, there's a couple safety things that you got to have. You got to make sure that you have safety glasses on. So anytime before you use any tool, make sure you have proper safety glasses on. You also should be wearing ear protection of some sort, whether it's just normal earplugs, a set of earplugs like I have on, whatever. Make sure you have ear protection so you're not damaging your ears. And when you're making numerous cuts, that's what's nice about having a stop, is you can set this fence up and you can cut, if I need to cut a board at 17 inches and I need to cut 5 boards, 10 boards, 50 boards, 100 boards, I've got a stop that's set up and I can just continue to make continuous cuts. Make sure that you don't have any loose clothing. Make sure you have nothing dangling, cords from your sweatshirts, any necklaces, things like that. Make sure you don't have anything that could get caught in the saw while you're using it. Make sure that the work area all around the saw, make sure you clean it, because when you're done cutting, especially if you're cutting short chunks off, make sure those pieces are cleaned away. And don't just throw them to the side, throw them in the trash can, get rid of them if they're scrap, if they're garbage. If there's a piece that you can reuse again, take that piece and put it away. Put it on the lumber shelf, lumber rack, whatever you have. Make sure it's not just left on the saw table. So I want to make a cut here just to show you. Like I said, the saw moves numerous different directions. Angles, bevels, compounds. Let me just make a cut here and I'll just show you. Earplugs in, safety glasses on. And like I said, you're going to pull the saw out and you're going to come out towards the front of the board. You're going to squeeze the trigger. Once you're out here, you'll squeeze the trigger. One of the things you got to realize, when you squeeze the trigger, the saw, because of the power of the saw, it's naturally going to kick up. So you got to make sure that you have a good hold so it doesn't just kick up and get out of control. So when you go to cut, and then once it stops, then you can raise the saw. As you saw, even when I cut that one, I cut about a 5/16 inch piece of wood off the end of this 2x6. Even when I had it down, this little chunk caught the blade and it flung back a little bit. If you were to bring the saw out while the blade is turning, this piece could fly anywhere. So you need to make sure that you're safe when you're using it. Make sure you don't raise the saw up without letting go of the trigger, making sure the blade stops. If your board is twisted, one of the things you need to make sure, the biggest area, we have our saw set up with a fence on our table. So when you put your board up against here, it really should be, if it's a straight board, it's going to be tight all the way along. But if you happen to be cutting a board that's bowed, your biggest thing is making sure that you're tight against the fence of the saw itself. Making sure that you're holding your one hand. If I'm standing and cutting on the left side of the saw, my left hand is holding the board down. My right hand is making the cut. If I'm on the other side, my right hand is holding the board down, my left hand is making the cut, but I'm making sure that I'm tight against the fence. I'm also making sure that it's flat on the bed of the saw, so that way it doesn't bind. And sometimes if you're cutting 2x4s or 2x6s and they have a bow in it, and you look and you notice that there's a gap on the back side of the 2x6, flip it over. And usually the other side, it'll go up tight up against the fence. That way you won't have it pinching, you won't have the saw kick back. Safety is the biggest key when you're using any tool in the shop, and the miter saw, chop saw is the same. If you don't know how to use it, ask. If you're not sure of the safety, ask. We also have safety signs, caution signs by the miter saw, so you can take a quick glance at that just to get a few reminders. But otherwise, that's pretty basic for the miter saw. We could go on a lot more, but that's pretty basic.